Over the last 5 years, I've been taken by the question of what motivates people to act in the way they do. I know psychologists, sociologists, geneticists, and even evolutionary biologists have their answers to why people do what they do. And that's well and good. Each of those disciplines provide valuable understanding. As a theologian, I'm concerned with how our understanding of God affects human ethical behavior. Of course, that's based on the assumption that our understanding of God does indeed affect our human ethical behavior. What do you think? Does an understanding of God who's punishing, for example, cause someone to be strict or scrupulous in their behavior? Does an understanding of God who's unconditionally loving cause someone to have less moral constraints? Does a God who invites us into the amazing work of liberating people cause us to participate in it? Or does an understanding of God who raises us from the dead, who frees us from shame, grief, and uncertainty, cause someone to act differently? In today's gospel, we hear that Jesus proclaims the good news of God, the proclamation that the people will be delivered from their oppressions is enough. Like Peter and Andrew, James and John, they hear the good news, get up, and go. Now, we know people like that. All they need is a target, a goal, and off they go, achieving it no matter the cost. Now, it's easy to romanticize Jesus calling the apostles, but for Peter, Andrew, James, and John, to leave their nets would have been a radical move. Their fathers and grandfathers were likely fishermen, so to give up the family trade would have been difficult, perhaps causing some shame. Moreover, fishing was their livelihood. Without it, they wouldn't have been able to make ends meet. One writer describes how the apostles leaving their nets applies to us. He says, "We may not fish for a living, but we know about casting and mending nets. Days that all seem the same. One looks like another. Life is routine. Lived on autopilot. Nothing changes. We don't expect much to happen. This is our life. We cast the nets and we mend the nets. Casting and mending to make a living, to feed our family, to pay the bills. Casting and mending to gain security, to get to retirement. Casting and mending to hold our family together, to make our marriages work, to raise our children. Casting and mending to gain the things we want, a house, car, books, clothes, a vacation. Casting and mending to earn a reputation, gain approval, establish status. Casting and mending our way through another day of loneliness, sadness, grief, or illness. Casting and mending are realities of life. They are also the circumstances in which Jesus comes to us, the context in which we hear the call to a new life, and the place where we are changed and the ordinary becomes the extraordinary. If I were to ask you, what motivated you to cast off your nets and follow Jesus, I'm sure I'd hear a variety of reasons. I'm sure you'd be able to share how things changed for better or worse. Recently, I was faced with a major decision. My counselor suggested I write a list of pros and cons. The assumption is that if I were to rationalize and see for myself the pros and cons, then it would be easier to make a decision. I took the activity seriously, and after careful reflection, saw what I needed to do. Now, actually doing what I needed to do required a leap of faith. While I'm almost entirely certain it was the right thing to do, there's still a tiny bit of doubt and a heck of a lot of grief, shame, and uncertainty. No doubt the apostles faced similar feelings. Grief over giving up a way of life they were born and raised to do, guilt and shame over leaving the family business, uncertainty over how they are going to survive without a way to make a living. And yet, Jesus met them there, on the seaside, of their casting and mending, and with an invitation, "Follow me," caused grief, guilt, shame, and uncertainty. But the apostles took the leap nonetheless. We know that the road ahead for the apostles was challenging. Peter and Andrew, tradition tells us, end up being executed for following and preaching the good news. I wonder, would they have followed Jesus if they knew they were going to die? Would you? Sorry for the reality check, but if we are to follow the conquering Lamb, that also means following him to the cross. Now, hopefully, we never have to literally die when we change our ways, but I think we all know that sometimes something in us will die when we do. Maybe things we clung on to will have to be let go. Ideas of how we wanted things to be have to die. Maybe the road through grief and shame is a form of death or a journey into the valley of death. One commentator explains, when Jesus said, "I will make you fish for people," he is describing the transformation of their lives. Not a job catching new members or followers. He could just as easily have said to the carpenters, "Follow me and you will build the kingdom of heaven." To farmers, "Follow me and you will grow God's people." To doctors, "Follow me and you will heal the brokenness of the world." To teachers, "Follow me and you will open minds and hearts to the presence of God." And to parents, "Follow me and you will nurture new life." Jesus invites us to participate in God's amazing work of saving people. That's a wonderful work to be part of, a life-giving work. Many of you know this. But Jesus' call to follow him isn't just an invitation, it's also a promise. That's the good news. It's a promise that the days do get longer and spring and summer will come. It's a promise that transitions in life that feel like death don't end with death. It's a promise that leaving our metaphorical nets do not end with uncertainty. It's a promise that life doesn't have to be paralyzed by shame and guilt. It's a promise that life isn't ruled by grief. And it's a promise that our story doesn't end with death. In this season of Epiphany, and in all seasons of our life, may we have eyes open to God's many calls and manifestations. May we see God coming to us as we mend and cast our nets in the everyday routines of our life. May we hear the promise of the good news that life doesn't end with grief and death, but new life. And may we hear the invitation to be part of God's saving work. I invite you now into a moment of sacred silence, listening to Christ calling you in the mending and casting of your nets.